Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa and Jojy.
Welcome to the next episode of Deconstructed Woman. We're going to talk today about feminism and what it means to Elisa and myself. I'm going to kick it off and talk about sort of my perception of how I've seen things sort of evolve. When I was thinking about feminism and what it means to me and what I've seen in my experience, the changes it's gone through, when I look at early feminism, talking about the suffrage movement and other things in the 1970s, I feel like there was a specific right or event or something specific that women were trying to fight for at that time. Something very specific that was going to change a woman's experience in some way. Today, I feel like feminism has become part of the fabric of a woman's experience. And I think that feminism now has evolved into many parts of our life. So what does it mean at the workplace, in your family, in your social circle? And so I feel like it's moved from a single object or a single event to now sort of permeating all parts of life into, like I said, sort of the fabric of what makes our experience be what we are. Lisa, what do you think about that concept that I'm sharing?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it is a concept that has evolved over time. And so, I looked up, okay, what is feminism? And it, just the Google definition is the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of the equality of the sexes. And, I read that and I think that, when I did a little bit of research, they're showing that, the next generation is saying, yeah, we all agree that there should be gender equality and women and men should have equal pay and these sorts of things. But I also think that feminism has gotten a bad connotation at times, or kind of a bad reputation. We have whole movements that have happened over the last, I would say, 2 decades, and or probably more than that. And that's probably because that's where, for me, it's been most prevalent. But the LGBTQ communities plus, have made movements about. Then a lot of those communities were saying, well, I'm a feminist, and there's just like a lot of merging of those kind of movements to the point where I don't think that I really knew the true definition of feminism, because from my own experiences, I saw a lot of people fighting for equal rights, using this feminist basis, but also kind of man bashing. And I think that has, again, given the kind of that bad reputation, for, I don't want to be part of that because I don't want to man bash, and there's the opposite side of that mansplaining and things like that have come into our society and into our verbiage that have also influenced how all of this is looked at. So I think there's a lot of things to unpack with this. But I think that for me personally, feminism kind of had a bad tone to it, and it was something that I kind of, I want equal rights, but I don't want to get on that bandwagon because that bandwagon might be going in a bad direction.
Yeah, I mean, when you shared the definition of feminism, it really struck me how broad it is, and at the same time, how far away we are still from it. So I find that sort of interesting, and I think that we talked about as we prepared for this topic that it is a really broad topic, and there's 100 different ways that you could break up this topic. And I think over the life of our podcast, we probably will bring up different aspects of it. So there's no way we could cover all of feminism in one topic. But I did, when you read the definition, or it really struck me really how broad it is. And I agree with you. I think because we are different ages, I think I was under the impression that like maybe I was born a feminist, even though I probably wasn't ideally set up that with my culture and my family of origin. But at the same time, I grew up, probably in the 80s and 90s, sort of feeling like, yeah, this is the way that I want to be and I want to live. And I know about 10, 15 years ago, I was struck by a 20 something year old actress who, when was asked, was in a she had some very strong female roles, and some celebrity reporter, asked her if she was a feminist, and she said, no, I love or appreciate men too much to be a feminist. And I was really taken aback by that. And that speaks to sort of the negative or man bashing that goes along, because my first thought was, what does being a feminist have to do with liking or disliking men? I mean, to me, they're two separate issues. I mean, do we live in a world where a woman can't stand up for what she believes in and love men or appreciate men at the same time? I will say that as we were preparing for this conversation, I did go back and look at that celebrity and sort of what she feels about it now, because it was a pretty controversial statement that she made, and she got a lot of bad press about it that many years ago. And she did come back and say recently that, as she's grown older, she's started to understand sort of the downfall of that statement that she made, and that she has reconciled the fact that you can be both. You can appreciate men and also stand up for women's rights. And so I think that in a nutshell encapsulates, I think, what women go through between their 20s and 30s, because I do think that kind of a shift does happen, because I think in your 20s you're really looking at having, finding a life partner, and, what does that encompass? And in your 30s, you might already be then now settled in that relationship, and you might have a career, and you're looking at, equality when it comes to pay or responsibilities or upward mobility, or, hitting the ceiling as fast as men do. And so I do think, that those kinds of factors start to weigh in on, you in your 30s and 40s, that probably are well over your head, maybe in your 20s, because you're at a different place in your life. So that whole idea of man bashing and that you brought up, I think that's where it connects for me.
Yeah, I think I mean, I would say that I'm over here nodding my head quite a bit, because I'm saying like, oh yeah, that's exactly kind of my trajectory. In my 20s, I think my late 20s, especially when I was starting to kind of look at different groups of people, and trying to find where you are in the world and in your career and things like that. It wasn't something that was at the forefront of my mind, and I didn't really feel that pull, because I wasn't full fledged into the workforce at that time. I was still in school. And so I think that it really does evolve, and as you get established, if you are working in the work field, I think that I'm in a predominantly woman driven field, but we do see, just in my own work, I see quite differences between men and women that is just very interesting. And so again, I don't think that I would say I'm a feminist, kind of label myself as that and kind of get on a podium about it. But I would say that I do see the differences in how men and women are approached. You see a man walks into the room and everybody kind of quiets down, and kind of they show this respect, and then a woman walks into the room and there's almost kind of like, oh hey, and it's just a very different dynamic. And again, I'm just pulling off of like my own like day-to-day experiences, but I think that there still is, like you said, quite a bit of work that needs to be done, and things that need to kind of be brought to the forefront. But I think that the, feminism in of itself, I think, has to kind of take a turn. And I don't know how it does, like, how does a movement evolve in our society? But it appears, again, kind of going back to that research, that a lot of the up and coming generations are saying, we want equality, we want fairness, we want this to be an equal playing field for all. And so hopefully, like, through that, there is change. And I don't know who makes that change, but I think that it's kind of a collective, being a woman, a collective effort to address those things as they come up in whatever avenue they do. And I don't know if that makes you a feminist. If you see kind of inequality in your workplace and you address it, would you then categorize yourself as a feminist?
Well, I'll comment on that because, for the listeners, I have a 26-year-old daughter and she's in nursing school. She finished, she's, going to be taking her boards in the next week or so. And one of the things that she reflected back to me, and I think she's an individual that thinks that she's an activist and that she has a lot of strong opinions about all things in general, but also about you know women and how they are looked upon within society, queer women, just queer people in general. And she was talking to me, and it made me think about the fact that in nursing, one of the things that I've noticed, and then I think it just got amplified when she was talking about it because she's a new grad nurse. And I did notice that, in the last 20 years, nursing went from being a female dominated field to now more and more men becoming nurses. But I think what I find the most shocking to me is how quickly a man can develop in his career from a floor nurse to an administrative role within healthcare. So that trajectory is very short for a man in that role, whereas for a woman to start off from bedside nursing to evolve into a head nurse and then move into like a director of nursing and then potentially, a chief nursing officer, that that would span a whole career for a woman. Yet I have seen in the health systems that I've worked in that a man can go through that very rapidly within about 10, 15 years. And why does that happen? How is that possible? And why is there such a big difference in that? And my daughter reflected to me that, the president of the honors nursing organization in the state of Illinois is a man. And she thought that was interesting given the number of female members they have in that organization. And so, once again, I think that as a 20 something person, she's sort of grappling with this and saying, okay, what does that mean for me? But she's also a lot more assertive in making sure that she's going to get paid the same amount of money that a man who might be up for the job would also get paid. In my career, in my early 20s, when I started my first professional career, that thought never even dawned on me. I never thought to compare what a man might be getting for the same job that I was doing. I assumed we were all the same and that we would all get the same pay. Looking back at that, I think I was being naive. And so I do think that assertive 20-some-year-olds negotiating their first salaries, second salaries, or whatever, has been made right because of the women that have been talking for the last 20, 30 years. And I think that puts the future women in a better place than I was in the late 1990s when I started my first job. So even though we may not define ourselves or label ourselves as feminists, I don't think there's a woman out there that can say that she hasn't benefited as a part of the movement on her experience. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And I think I was actually, I was almost kind of I know in our next episode, we're going to talk about, why do women put themselves last? But I was actually thinking about like my own personal situation because we're talking about the workforce. But I think that it extends to a lot of different areas too, because my husband's a stay-at-home dad, and even his, people are like, oh, that's so wonderful that he stays home and he takes care of the kids, and like they're dotting on him. Is that the right? I always say it wrong.
Doting.
Doting. I always say it wrong. Doting on him. Like, oh, look, like, even again, like that shift of roles. And I'm the breadwinner and I work outside the home. And how that's viewed, I mean, we're I think there, like you had said before, like there's so many things here, but we're talking about the work field. But I think it also expands into our homes and how we view, and the traditional views versus kind of what they're changing into. um but I would agree with everything that you were saying. I think that there's just a lot of, I don't know how to articulate it, like it's just a lot of evolution, but also like just so much more growth that needs to be had.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, 100% for sure. And I also think that, historically, sort of power in a relationship or in a family was determined by the breadwinner, right? And so I think about, a time where in your life where you are the primary breadwinner, but for a woman to think, therefore, she controls the way the financial decisions are made. I can't speak for you, nor, it's probably too personal of a question, but I think, 50 years ago, that's the way it was, right? If you were the primary breadwinner and you were a man, you decided when things were bought and how things, if you could afford a house, or, I mean, I don't know how much a woman was consulted in those financial decisions, but in today's world, for the women who are the primary breadwinners, it seems unexpected that that same power would be put into a woman because now she's the primary breadwinner. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the irony is still there, I feel, in many ways. And I think that we as women become more equal. There's actually more equity versus where we were 50 years ago when the opposite was true from a breadwinning standpoint. So I don't know if you followed that, but I just think it's ironic because I think that as women, as equality evolves, so does the rest of society in certain ways.
Yeah, well, I would say that, as much as, there are more women in the workforce, more women that are, I did a little bit of research, not necessarily for this topic, but way back when, because I was curious. I was like, how many working moms are there, or just working, women that are the breadwinners? Like, I was just curious, and there is a large majority, and I think there has been a shift to, more women working in the work field. You know, you go to school and you pick a career, and the intention is that you are going into the work field. I mean, I know in my college days there were women who went to college to find a husband, and that was their primary goal. They didn't, they got a degree just to fall back on if they ever needed it, but their purpose was to find a partner and to be a stay-at-home mom. And to me, that was never kind of my viewpoint. I was always like, I have a career, and if a husband comes along, great. But like, I am focused on where I want to go. But I think that within that, so you had mentioned like, there's more equality, but I go to work, I come home, and I shift gears into housewife. And there's again, there isn't as much, like my plate's much fuller as opposed to if I were, let's say the roles were shifted and I was a stay-at-home mom. And then I could, then I'm sure there would be expectations of what I would be doing, and those sorts of things. And I think that we still, again, I think that hopefully society is evolving, but I think stay-at-home moms get, a rough kind of reputation if they don't keep the house and things like that. And so I think that, again, this kind of evolves into different aspects of our society and how women are viewed in our different roles, whether it's in the workforce or in the home. I think that there's a lot of different ways that it's viewed as to what the expectations are. If we are evolving into having more equality, does that mean that we have more on our plates than we would have had if we didn't get here? I think that's probably like the thought-provoking question on the other end.
Well, I also think about the comment you made about, working outside the home. I think part of feminism also distinguish between women who work outside the home and also women who work within the home, right? And I would say that, that's a relatively new change in our language. I don't remember, I would say probably in the 80s, when I was in high school and going to college, that there was really a highlighting of, are you a woman who works in the home or outside the home? I mean, that distinction did not exist. I had a working mom when I was growing up. And so to me, that was normal. And like most working moms, she had a full-time job and she came home and then she became wife and mother and housekeeper like you are and like I was. And so, but for those moms who are stay-at-home moms, I think that there's been a huge acknowledgement of the fact that, working at home is a lot of work too. Just because, and the whole idea about, what do we pay women? If we were to monetize what women who work at home should be earning, and how does that, bring that idea into the fold as well? So I think that a lot of these concepts are, I think as a result of these conversations that have happened over the last many decades. And I think that we would be a very different society if the feminist movement didn't continue to trickle through the years, whether there were heavy periods or light periods, it still continues to have a snowball effect, just like the Me Too movement had in the last, 5 to 8 to 10 years, that has influenced a lot of women, not only in the workplace, but also this generation of young women that were in high school or college, during the last 10 years. And so I know that this is actually ending up to be a longer session than we had originally planned for, but I don't want to end this podcast without, sort of asking you about your two girls. You have two young girls under the age of 10, I think, maybe even 7. And I'm curious about how, not necessarily how feminism will affect them, but how do you feel that, um, your parenting of them might be impacted by this whole topic?
Well, I think that, I try to, so I almost want to go back to my childhood because I was brought up in a family where, you are, my parents are both highly organized, highly productive individuals who really focused on, like, my dad used to say, are you a wolf or a sheep? And it was just like this profound statement that I think carried through most of my life. It was like, are you a leader or are you a follower? And so I think that that trickles down into how I raise my children, but I also am trying to embrace kind of, you know it's not necessarily on the topic of feminism, but like trying to make them a little bit more well-rounded. And I think that them seeing their dad home with them, they have a mother who leaves and goes to work, and they understand that what that means, and they see their dad at home. And so I think that in some ways I do invoke this kind of strong push for, you can do either or. You can find a career that you want to go into and focus on it and be you, or you can be like dad and stay at home and take care of your children. Like, I kind of try to meld that, and so that it's not completely this whole, you have to blaze the trail for all women behind you. I don't think that that ever really comes to my forefront of my mind. when I'm talking to them. But I think, and they are under the age of 7, so they're very young right now. So we haven't really delved into those conversations. But I know, like, even my daughter in first grade was saying, oh, I'm gonna get a boyfriend. And we kind of were like, nope, there's no boyfriends, there's no girlfriend, like there's no, everybody's just friends. Like, it's too
Mm-hmm.
early for that. You're like 6 years old. um but I think that even like their very young generation, I don't know where that started, but it was just like, no, you know the focus is on everybody's friends and everybody's equal, and that like sort of mentality. Which, I mean, I guess it's yet to see if that kind of filters into how they evolve, as they get into the teenage years and beyond. But again, I think I'm trying to create this environment in which they have a little bit of both, and they're seeing these different roles, but they also see their friends' parents where, oh, so and so's mom stays at home and her dad goes to work, and that's a different perspective. And I think that I'm just trying to create this environment where and I wouldn't say anything goes, but that there's more of an understanding that the roles can be either or, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I will say that what you're recounting about your daughter's comment about a boyfriend, is very similar to my daughter's experience when she was in kindergarten. And her, like within the first week, she said, "Mom, am I popular?" And I was like, "How do you even know that word? Like, why are you even talking about that?" But I think that's the push pull of, what other people and other children influence us and our family and what we're trying to do for our own kids. And I do think that you do, what you said resonates with me, because I think that if we go back to the values and what our parents wanted to raise us with, those values haven't changed. I don't think, like, that they are high quality, noteworthy values. And I think that's what, whether you're a feminist or not, those values are probably the upstanding values that our society does need. So I do think that you remind me of that. And thank you for that. That it's not, I mean, I don't think feminist values have to be different than non-feminist values, right? We're just trying to create a society where people are doing good and, are fulfilling their purpose. So, um, I think that that's an important distinction, and that's important, and I'm glad you said that way. Good for you.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say. I mean, Oh gosh, I think we're probably gonna have to cut ourselves off at some point, because I think
Yeah.
we could probably, like you said, we could probably talk about this all night long. Because I'm even thinking about. I wonder if my dad had, or my parents, I should say, like if my parents had a son, how would that have been different? Like what would that have looked like? My dad had to. I say my dad because like he was the driving force behind all of this. My mom, again, she's highly organized and productive individual, but like my dad was like the most, his voice is the one that resonates in my mind. And maybe that influenced me a lot too, of just being this like powerful person. But he had 2 girls, and so he had 2 daughters, and so he encouraged us to be strong independent women. Like that was what he wanted for us. And there was a point in my life where my parents kind of pulled away and said, we're pushing you out of the nest, like you're on your own, good luck. And I had such a hard time with that, at that time, because it was, like this is what you're doing. So I think that our own experiences highlight how we view feminism, how we view our world, our worldview and our world experiences. I think that I was thinking as we were talking about how what profession you go into influences how you view women and the roles, whether you're in a woman dominated field or not. And so I think that there's so many influences on us from a number of different areas that, you know, again, home, life, work, all of those that color your view of feminism and kind of bring it to the forefront. And I think for some people it's more prominent, and for others, maybe they haven't even thought about it. And so, this might be the first time they're like, that's an interesting concept. But I hope that it is highlighted and continues to be an open discussion, because I think it's an important part of being a woman in society today.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I mean, as you were talking, I thought about 3 other angles that we could take this conversation down. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to write those down as ideas for another podcast, because we acknowledge that this is a broad topic. We're not going to cover it all today. And I think it's probably a good place to end today. What do you think?
Absolutely. Well, I think that, again, we've covered a lot of ground, and thank you for those of you who are kind of checking in for the first time and listening to us. We welcome you to the Deconstructed Woman podcast. Feel free to email us at thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com, and we would love to hear from you. We always welcome new ideas and ways to, whether it's idea for an episode, or if you'd like to join us on the podcast, email us those ideas and thoughts, and we will read them as soon as they come through, and hopefully be able to put that into future episodes that we have. So thank you again for listening, and we hope to talk soon.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions, or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.